Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the two IPs in a pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Hey Gwilym, two podcasts, one after another on consecutive days. How you coping with the strain of that, mate?
I love it. I enjoy the podcasts. I always enjoy seeing you. We learn new things every time. How's that for an optimistic response?
What have you learned recently then?
Oh, we learned about takedowns, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we got a more serious one today. But I think our main concern is that we run out of banter if we have too many of these back to back. But I've got some.
You've got some. So we're nearly 150 episodes in and you're still able to conjure up some fresh bants, which is impressive.
You ready?
Go for it.
Merry Christmas.
No, it's too early. Please.
It's come.
No. Honestly, before we came in to start the podcast, we were discussing in the office whether we should be playing Christmas music, and I'm clearly in a minority.
It was playing downstairs, simply having a wonderful Christmas time, was playing as I walked in with the little bells going, and I'm up for it this year. I'm ready for Christmas. I want to bring it early and I want to bring a lot of it. That's my feeling.
So I love Christmas as much as the next person, if the next person is really grumpy Grinch.
You're a coal giver. No, I don't know why. This year, I'm on for it. I really want to bring the Christmas. I'm looking forward to the SEEP Christmas party. That's exciting.
Yeah.
The office Christmas party. I want to buy a tree now. Get it up. I'm going for it.
Oh, I just worry about Christmas. I spend far too much money on far too many children and grandchildren. I never know how I'm going to survive all of the visitors. It spirals me into a state of misery and despair.
Luckily, my kids do all the cooking now, which makes a huge difference. The most difficult bit, and I don't want to spoil the mystery here, but Father Christmas has to do a lot of stockings these days. It's a big family tradition that Father Christmas has to do a lot of stockings. And he's told me that it's exhausting and thankless.
I can only imagine it is. And, Father Christmas has a really tough time, doesn't he, in December, particularly sort of one tough evening. So it must get to him as well. He must feel the strain. So how good then that we're talking about men's mental health? Did you like that?
Is Father Christmas doing Movember? That'd be a shock for everybody.
Well, the thing is, my understanding of Movember, which I'm not doing this year, but I've done previously, is that you have to start from scratch, don't you? You have to start from a freshly shaved visage. So I imagine Father Christmas would probably not want to ever be seen in a way that he's never been seen previously. So maybe he can't do Movember for that reason.
He'd need a chainsaw to get through that beard, wouldn't he?
Absolutely. Or just something to cut the elastic.
Yeah.
Anyway, are you done with the band? Should we get the guests on?
Yeah, that's all right. How did I do, Lee?
Yeah, that was okay. We can always edit it out afterwards. So yeah, we've got two guests with us today to talk about issues around men's mental health, seeing as we are in the month of Movember. So shall we go with Graham first? Graham, welcome to the podcast. Your first time on.
Yes, thank you, Lee. Thank you, Gwilym. Delighted to be here. So shall I get cracking with an intro about myself?
Yeah, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, so I think people in the IP world who come across me have probably come across me in the context of the charity Jonathan's Voice. So I'm one of the co-founders of the charity, which has been going now for somewhere between 6 and 7 years. I mean, we started going as a charitable organisation about 7 years ago, but it took a little while to become registered by that very august body, the Charity Commission. So if you count from the Charity Commission date, we're a little bit over 6 years. The charity's work, I think I hope a lot of your listeners have interacted with this or seen this on the web or been involved in webinars that we put on with IP Inclusive. But essentially, we've been focusing on mental health. And with the help of Rich, more recently, we've tried to home in a bit on men's mental health. And of course, the reason for that, which is a family tragedy, really, and I'll just mention briefly, goes back to October 2017. And our son was Jonathan Mccartney. And Jonathan joined the intellectual property profession straight out of university. He was a Durham University graduate in engineering, graduated in 2005, went straight into the intellectual property profession from his undergraduate degree. And I think qualified as both a European and UK patent attorney in 2008. So he was with Hazeltine Lake, as it was then, and he was based up in their Leeds office, which wasn't very far from us. We as a family lived in Nottingham. Anyhow, as people might remember, around that time, 2009, 2010, times were hard in the financial world, and Jonathan was asked if he was interested in transferring to the Bristol office, which he did. And I think by about 2014, he'd become a partner and moved on then to become part of their leadership team. But tragically, and this is something which you can't say you ever understand it, but Jonathan tragically took his own life in October 2017 at the age of only 35. And it's something that I've come to understand by people who've worked to try and understand suicide. It was what's called an out of the blue event. Nobody who was close to him, nobody who worked with him really saw this coming. And it turns out that this actually is sadly not unusual for men. Often, this will just happen apparently out of the blue. So, of course, there are situations where people do suffer ongoing issues of depression and so on, and that does lead to tragically suicide. But very often, in the case of men, it's an out of the blue event. So Jonathan, appeared to be on the outside, things appeared to be going well. And to give you a bit of context, he'd spent 2 weeks in America, traveling around, being at one of these international conferences that patent attorneys organise. He'd come back. He'd had a high-profile client who was from America who'd come to visit him. He'd taken him up to Leeds because at that time they were negotiating their tie-up with Kempner. So Jonathan had been involved on that. His American colleague was a big fan of Manchester United. So they crossed the Pennines and they went to Old Trafford on the Saturday. And rather poignantly, the very last communication I had from him was a picture by text, which was of the Manchester United ground, which obviously is called the Theatre of Dreams. He came home, back to Bristol, and he didn't go into work on Monday morning. He rang up and said he wasn't feeling very well, and that was the last anybody heard from him. So a completely out of the blue tragedy. And I think this is why we really, as a charity, want to focus on mental health in the IP profession, because we really feel that we'd like to encourage the profession to be more aware and to provide more training, to provide more support. And of course, ultimately, we want to help all people. But when the opportunity arose probably about a year ago through work that Richard was doing through IP Inclusive, then we were very keen to join this emphasis on men's mental health. So that's an overview of where we are. Just to add context, of course, I myself have never had anything to do with the IP world. I'm not a patent attorney, not a trademark attorney. By profession, I have interest in engineering and specifically materials engineering, but I worked as an academic for my working life, 35, 40 odd years, but I've never been a patent attorney, other than in my professional life to see them as someone who prevented me publishing papers because they always said, oh no, you can't publish that.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, Graham. I've heard you sort of tell it a number of times now because we've talked over the last few years at events and so on, and it's such a sad story. And I know how difficult it's been for you and Val, but I know that you're quite proud with what you've managed to forge out of that in terms of Jonathan's voice and the work that you're involved in there, which is just truly amazing. And to say that you aren't part of the IP world, I think would be a huge understatement, because I think you are very much part of the fabric now. And I think the IP world would be a poorer place for you not being involved in it. So thank you for all you do. But should we get Rich on as well? Rich, do you want to tell us a wee bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me on, Lee and Gwilym. It's really nice to be here. So, yeah, my name's Rich Wells. For my sins, I'm a patent attorney, but I know this is a safe space, so yeah, I guess we can talk about that. I've been in the profession since 2012, having worked in private practice until last year when I moved in-house to an ag tech company called Tropic Biosciences, which is it's a really fantastic and vibrant place to work. How did I get involved in mental health and men's mental health? I'm sure we can dive into some more of the detail later, but I guess the whistle stop tour is at my previous firm, Potter Clarkson, who had quite a forward-thinking way of viewing well-being. I was trained as a mental health first aider, and through that and the network of mental health first aiders in the IP world, I sort of came on Andrea Brewster's radar, and that is how I started working a bit with IP Inclusive and men's mental health, as Graham alluded to. That led me to essentially help Andrea as kind of a very enthusiastic amateur. I put myself as to help sort of build a bit of a collaborative spirit around putting on events, working really closely with Graham and Andrea, and just to try and get men talking about mental health and try and get it as almost a topic that people are comfortable talking about in the IP world. So I guess that's the elevator pitch of me and how I entered this world. But well, not entered this world. That sounds like it's been that's an origin story that I don't think anyone's got time for today. But entered the world of men's mental health in the IP profession. So yeah, that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Cheers, Rich, and you have my every sympathy for finding yourself on Andrea Brewster's radar, because I know that can be quite a challenging place to be.
It's a great place to be. She is she'll probably listen to this, so I feel I should say that.
She will.
So yeah, so thank you. Shout out to Andrea for all the good work you do. But I think she is the driving force about many good things that happen in the profession. You know,
Absolutely.
she and IP Inclusive are phenomenal.
So we know that this is a conversation that's quite difficult for men to have generally, but we need to have the conversation on this podcast. Where should we start? Where would be the best place to kick off a conversation?
I think a good place to kick it off might be. I did an interview with a journalist probably a couple of years ago now, and when the article appeared in print, I was maybe a little perturbed to see the headline that the journalist used. The headline was "Mental Health and Law. Does IP have a culture problem?" So I think that's a good place to kick off the conversation. That would be my starting point, and see if we can maybe come up with some discussion points on that, and see what the challenges are and what progress we've made.
Should we ask Gwilym?
By all means.
Come on, does IP have a culture problem?
It's very interesting, wasn't it? Funny enough, I was actually chatting to someone yesterday who was looking at going into the legal profession, and I'm very clear that our sector is a not totally representative, but obviously we know a little bit. So I was discussing it on that basis, and he was looking more at general law, and I have to say that in that conversation, I was saying that it feels a lot tougher in the general law world than in our world, in terms of the work pressures, and in particular in terms of the work-life balance that we all hear about. So, I mean, you're hearing with junior solicitors in some of the big London players that the salaries are now going completely crazy, but it's expected that you'll work till 2 a.m. or whatever it might be. It's just taken for granted. And at least in the patent attorney world, that pressure has never been there. I think we're well known to have a different approach to the hours challenge, and I think most private practice firms, at least, are a bit embarrassed to tell the solicitors, for example, what our hours targets are, because they kind of look at us in slight amazement. that number? I'm not going to throw any numbers out on this podcast, but so in a sense, the most prevalent kind of cause people point to in terms of mental health issues in the legal sphere more broadly, I don't think really that well known in the patent attorney world. I can't speak to the litigators. I know they have a tougher time, and the transaction guys. So I think that if there is a problem, it's not that. It's not the fact that we are worked to the bone and we're all going until 2 o'clock in the morning. We don't sleep anymore. I think it's a profession where you can get a good work-life balance. But that's not me saying that there aren't other issues. It's just not as obvious, perhaps, as the issue that tends to come out of the broader legal practice. I haven't answered the question, Lee, but I have started a bit more of the conversation.
Yeah. That's been interested on Rich's and Graham's take on that.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to dive in here. Gwilym, I think I agree with what you're saying about the way in which, if you compare IP as an area of law with general law, that there does feel to be this difference. And I don't know whether that comes from, as we know, patent attorneys are scientists first, lawyers second. And I think they come from maybe a different place, maybe it attracts a different mindset. There's a different set of expectations there. And, I think people who do law know what they're signing up for when they decide on their degree course, but that's less so with patent attorneys. So I don't know whether that sort of that almost grassroots culture comes from the kind of people it attracts. But one thing that is always challenging when you almost set a very high bar to compare against, clearly if you look at London law firms, the starting salaries that are in the press at the moment, that does feel terrible, but that doesn't diminish that there are challenges in the IP world, clearly. And I don't know whether some of that is the people that come to it, scientists first, lawyers second. Not saying that they're not set up for it, but I know when I joined the profession, I came from a PhD where basically I was wearing 3/4 lengths all through the year, very casual, and you enter this professional world because you think, oh, it's a stable job, it sounds interesting, and it feels like you're expected to write like Shakespeare, communicate like Obama, party like Prince Harry, and it's an alien world and it's quite a jump. And I don't know whether some of the culture, if it's a problem, is just sort of the way in which expectations might be built when you enter the profession and how that changes when you grow through it, particularly thinking about challenges such as sort of perfectionism and imposter syndrome and all these impacts that can be quite negative on mental health. And so I don't think there's the same culture problem that there is with big law in the kind of more general sense, as you say, Gwilym, but I still think that maybe there are areas that the profession can work on, because it is high pressure. It is high pressure. It's undoubted. You might not be working till 10, but before you log off at 5 and you've got that patent application to file, then that is stressful.
Yeah, I completely agree. And sorry, to be clear, I think it's not. We don't have the same hours pressure. That's not to say there aren't different pressures that can cause
absolutely.
Yeah. And I think your point is a brilliant one about the people who come into it, because I don't know many people who, from the age of 6, were saying, I want to be a patent attorney. People tend to fall into it. Whereas I suspect if you want to be a lawyer, you may well have had a longer term plan to do that. And perhaps as a result, started adjusting your kind of mindset towards those pressures. I don't know, but there's something around you. I'm sure you're right. The people who come into it, and also the route in, which remains, I think, slightly still quite haphazard after all these years. It's always, I heard about it from a careers advisor. Also, I knew someone who did it. It's always a strange kind of entry. So maybe people come in with slightly less expectation and not thought it through. I don't know.
I think thinking about what people talk to us about. We go to conferences, we have exhibitor stalls at conferences and so on, and people do come up and talk about it. And I think for people coming into the profession, early career profession, one of the pressures, I think, is the way some organizations conduct training. Although I think there's been a lot of progress in that. But I think one of the pressures that early career people feel is the training and the learning on the job, and the way training's provided varies a great deal, and sometimes they find it hard to understand what they should be doing. The training is often drafting, red pen, go and redraft, rather than training, draft, explain what's wrong, go and redraft. So I think there's an element of that early career people find difficult. And I think the other big thing is managing deadlines. That deadlines do seem to hang over everybody. Everybody we talk to talks about deadlines and how critical that is, and the pressures of getting things right, and the implications of making mistakes. So I think those are the areas that people talk to us about, which may or may not be representative. But I think I agree with you, Gwilym, that probably it's too strong to say there's a culture problem, but I think there's a ways of working that introduce pressures. And I think what I was keen to talk about today was, as Rich and I, we've been trying to work at men's mental health and are there things that firms could be doing better, organizations could be doing better to really help men with adapting and accommodating and managing these kinds of issues that come up.
Happy to come back on the training and deadlines point. And to be really, really clear, I'm not defending the profession at all, actually. I think there clearly is a problem. They manifested, and it's something that you're quite right, we need organisations to address. But I think the safest way to look at it is how it used to be, rather than trying to comment on how it is now, which I think is a bit risky, but how it used to be. As someone who started in 1990, it was a Victorian profession when I started. I think the whole profession was. And so you were trained the way that the last 5 generations have been trained. And deadline management was something, I think you were trained also for some quite dodgy deadline management. Deadline was a thing to run that as fast as you could and then hit with a smash was basically quite a common trend, rather than, for example, doing it early. And the concept of any kind of HR, I doubt if any firm had an HR department in 1990 in our boutique profession. I'm pleased to say that these days there's obviously far more awareness and fantastic work that Jonathan Voice and IP Inclusive and other things do is a huge part of that. But looking back, certainly historically, it was a pretty old school setup. And I think that brought many of its problems. So I was going to probably leave it at that in terms of, rather than starting to cause problems with firms writing in saying, hang on, we're trying really hard, because we know that they are. Maybe, as you say, move on to some of the stuff that's out there. Leon, handing back to you now, because I feel like I'm getting defensive and I shouldn't be.
So I don't think there's a problem with getting defensive, Gwilym. I think that's part of the conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I mean, and my exposure to the profession has only been I'm just coming up for 13 years in now. And I remember thinking when I came in, and I'll speak quite candidly now, if that's okay, I didn't recognise anything that looked like training. And I come from an educationalist background. That's my bag. That's what I do. And I found it quite difficult to see where training was happening. At that time, the informals were entirely distinct and separate from SEPA. So they were effectively a self-help group of students that existed largely on their own devices with little support and help. And the training that happened within firms was, I think Graham said, it was largely down to the individual firm. And I actually think it's come a long way in that time. Doesn't mean to say that there's not a journey that we still need to go on, and there's not more that we can do. But we now have the informals embedded in SEPA. So they have a formal relationship, representation on council and those kinds of things. Together, we've set up a mental health advisor network through the informals, so that there is that point of contact in the student community around mental health. And we're having some really serious conversations about the structure of the examinations. And when we have those conversations, we do talk about the way the examination and the structure of the examination impacts on the well-being of students and candidates. So it feels to me that we've come a long way in the last decade, but that doesn't mean to say that there's not still some way to go.
I would agree. I think what I would say is it's been great to see the progress. It's been great to see the progress on many, many different fronts, really positive. And we just need to make sure that progress, as you said, Lee, that we keep looking, reviewing, and making progress on all those fronts. I think that's the good news. And I think the good news, if we can just talk a bit about Movember, the good news is that men and mental health is being spoken about more. And if we just talk about what we've done, I mean, we're now heading towards our 3rd event, and we've got a 4th event in the calendar. And we've had some great speakers. We had Nick Bloy for the very first event back in November 2023. We had James McFarlane in June 24, who was truly inspiring from Scotland and talked about the work he had done. we've got the event which is coming up next week on the 21st of November, Kelty in their London office, which is going to be a hybrid event. And that's going to be a lady who's done research on suicide and preventive measures at the University of Glasgow, Dr. Susie Bennett, who was partly funded by the donations that people made to our charity, actually. And she's made some groundbreaking researches on suicide in men. So she's going to come and talk about that. And I think then we've got a wonderful guy lined up for February, Rich, haven't we, whom you and Andrea have managed to lay your hands on?
Yeah, it's a man called Ryan Park, he specialises in understanding men's mental health and sort of looks at it from the scientific perspective. His webinar that he's giving is kind of slightly provocatively titled "The Myth That Kills Men," and it's sort of about the role that testosterone has to play. That's one thing that he looks at in mental health and interplay there. So really fascinating stuff. And I think like Graham said, there's a bit of a track record and there's momentum. And I think one thing, we're talking about positivity here, and there's maybe some sort of reflection that we'll do later in the podcast. But each of these events that were put on, apart from the webinar coming in February, has been fully supported by a firm within the IP community. There's real support out there, and these are people giving their time. There's technical support well into the evening, their office space, putting on drinks and snacks. It sounds small, but actually these organizations don't need to do this. They don't get a lot of kudos. We can say them here. It's Mathers and Squire for the first one, EIP for the second one, and as Graham said, Kelty for the third. But I think and this is maybe the nub of where we've got to. There's the real acknowledgement and there's the real support there. I think sometimes the challenge is just knowing what to do with that, particularly around men's mental health. It's not that people don't care. People care. They just don't know which direction to care in sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Rich. And I think it is great that we've had firms on board. I think it does show their commitment. And I think firms and other organizations really do see it, are beginning to see it increasingly as a good investment, because it's an investment in ensuring people thrive, in ensuring people remain well. And ultimately, that's good business, makes good business sense. And it's an investment in the future. It's an investment ensuring that when people come, and as I understand it, maybe Gwilym will tell me differently, recruiting people by whatever means into the patent attorney profession is not straightforward, and finding good people is challenging. So having the best possible working environment is always going to be a hook for people and good for recruitment. So I think firms recognise it's an investment in the present, an investment in the future.
You're completely right. Any business like ours, the people are the asset. That's all we've got. We haven't got machines doing patents. Well, not yet anyway. So it's the people that count. And a really important there actually is that getting the right people into the business is a challenge. It is a range of skills. I hadn't picked up on the partying strength point that you mentioned, Richard, but that's also not irrelevant occasionally. But also retaining is a big deal. And I think this is where retention comes in. If you're not happy in what you're doing, if you're not enjoying it, for whatever reason, then you're more likely to move on. And that all that investment and work finding the right people, and then we've got to make sure that we keep them when we keep people happy. Then it's a great job, and we really want people to enjoy it.
Can I just add something to that Graham said? Because I think I don't hear this said often enough. I don't think whenever we have these conversations about mental health, men's mental health, however we might frame it, we always talk about the business case. It's about returning people to productivity. It's about the environment. Sometimes we just ought to say it's the right thing to do. Yes, it's all of those things, but it's just the right thing to do. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that occasionally.
I completely agree. Yeah, it's simple but effective, isn't it? I think sometimes the business case, especially if there needs to be money to be spent internally, though, that's the sad truth of it. Sometimes the business case needs to be made, doesn't it? But ultimately, it's the right thing to do. So, it should be enough. Push it over the line, I guess.
one of the earliest conversations I had with Andrea, and this was about this wasn't about mental health specifically. It was in the early days of IP Inclusive when we were talking about EDI generally at meetings, largely with managing partners. And it was always about, well, what's the business case for EDI? What's the business case for inclusion? It's like, sometimes it's just the right thing to do. And, there might be a cost to it. Yes, yeah, we can do the financial kind of playing around with pound, shillings and pence and demonstrate that actually there's a productivity outcome, positive productivity outcome, but it's still the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
Can I take it in a slightly different direction? And I don't, Graham, I don't know whether we've had this conversation before, but I've never had experience of a family member taking their own life. I do have experience of people that I was close to, and this goes back to my time in teaching, and it caused me to train in counselling because I just felt that I needed to understand what was happening. And for me, the two instances that I experienced were both so similar that I don't know why I missed the signs the second time round, and that was what caused me to see whether getting some training would help me in future. So they were both students. They were separated in my career by a few years, so it happened across maybe 3 or 4 years. But both did exactly the same thing, and that's that they had finished their courses. They were both mature adult students. They'd finished their plumbing courses, and they came a year, 2 years after they qualified, and made a really sort of deliberate show of thanking me for everything I'd done, the contribution I'd made to their life. It was as if they were saying goodbye, but I didn't twig. And then both of them took their lives the day that they had that conversation with me. And I mean, I won't say that I particularly got that out of my training. And all I want to ask is, are there things that we could be looking for in our relationships with people that might help us understand when someone is in a particularly dark place? Or is this so difficult that we can't engage?
I think it's incredibly difficult. I think that the person to really ask is Susie Bennett, who's giving the talk next week at Kelty. She studied this in great depth about are there signs, and I think the answer is it's a really difficult problem. There are many variables, and that's why we're sadly still at the situation that the statistics of 80 men per week take their own life in the UK, because it is so difficult to pick up on signs or nuances of what's happening. I don't think I have any specific easy or even complex guidelines I can give you. I think listening to people carefully, as you'll have picked up from your counselling training, we really need to try and listen carefully to what people are saying, not have superficial answers. But I think even as you've seen, that people came to you, they came with a story, not in a crisis mode, and therefore why would you pick up anything? So I think they're subtle, it's very complex, and I think unfortunately we need to understand much more about it, which was what motivated us to go to a university, the University of Glasgow, and part fund and support some of the work they're doing. And for people who would like to try and understand more, there is an excellent lead academic at Glasgow, Professor Rory O'Connor, who communicates wonderfully with the public. He's got many podcasts, appears regularly on radio and TV, and he really is able to communicate about suicide, the multifaceted aspects of suicide, and people, I would encourage people to listen to what he has to say, follow him on LinkedIn, look at some of the things he's saying, and that's a good starting place to try and understand more about this very complex and difficult problem.
I was going to say one thing that I find personally super valuable from the awareness raising and some of the chilling numbers that we hear about has been to rethink my relationship with my own kids as they get older. Actually, having heard some of these kind of stories about the surprises and things, how they can come, and come from a family background where you kind of leave home and then you kind of phone once a month. I'm a lot closer to my sons and my daughter as well, of course. I'm much closer to my sons than I might have been otherwise, because I don't feel that they get to 18 and everything's okay and they're off and their life's their own and they don't need their support network anymore. So it's been really good for me, actually, in that sense. I think I've rethought some of the kind of preconceptions I didn't realize I had about my own family relationships as the background. Not saying that I'll necessarily spot things, but the feeling that I'm trying and I'm trying to be there for them, that's really helped me. So I've appreciated that, and the work that you guys have done for the awareness has been brilliant from that.
Yes, I think it's one of the, when we first started the charity, I probably was more on top of these statistics than I am now. But when I used to go and talk to groups, I used to talk to them about the fact that as a parent of teenage children, probably the thing you worried about was when you sent your son, particularly, past a driving test and they went out on their own driving a car, and there were probably things that you worried a lot about. And actually, if you looked at the statistics, for young men, dying in road traffic accidents was not the most common cause of death. It was, in fact, taking their own lives by suicide. And that was something that people really, really were surprised about. And I think it's good to hear you say, Gwilym, that you're more aware of that kind of statistic. And I think that is important, because yes, workplaces are important, but yes, families are also crucial in supporting individuals.
And I think one thing that's really nice about this conversation and important is it's maybe not always about focusing on spotting what the signs are. This is clearly important and we need to look out for each other. But it's almost just that mindset shift that individuals can have about the relationships that they form with others and the environment that you build. Because if you build an open environment where people are willing to talk, it lessens the responsibility of people looking out for signs in many ways, because hopefully conversations are more open. I'd say honest. Calling conversations honest makes it sound like if you're hiding stuff, you're dishonest. That kind of the repercussive effect, as you'd say, as a patent attorney. But it's, I think if we can build environments and form relationships that are open to talking about mental health, that opens the window to, if people are having suicidal feelings, that they do discuss it with someone that they trust. And so I think, Gwilym, your experience is really heartening, that the way in which communities can talk about these things, sort of almost a separation away from individuals, causes individuals to reflect on their own lives and maybe change their own actions in a positive way.
Yeah. And I do think that it's good to see the changes that there are in the culture, in firms, in organizations. And it's important to remember that it's leadership teams that set those cultures. And it's important to remember that engaging with leadership teams is very important. Of course, there's a bottom-up element to all of these things. But seeing leadership teams really set the culture and make people aware that there are support mechanisms, there are individuals trained as mental health first aiders. However, that permeates the organization. The leadership team being invested in that is a crucial element.
I think leadership is the key, isn't it? Gwilym, might there be a leadership event coming up that people might be interested in?
You are so good at this, Lee. Yes. So one of the kind of threads of IP Inclusive is a kind of a senior leaders thread. It's not, I don't think it's one of the kind of defined groups, but it was, again, as usual, Andrea making us all better people, recognizing that if the leadership isn't buying in properly to the whole picture, EDI across the board, all the elements of it, and everything beyond that as well, then it's not necessarily going to permeate through the business. And I've always characterized it as you can't just delegate these things to the HR department. So the senior leaders do some stuff, and one of them coming up on the 25th at Kildenhurst Road is about how to be a good ally. And funnily enough, Rich, this actually links to your point about we want to care, we don't know which direction to care in. I loved that. I love the concept for the geeks of care as a vector.
Yeah.
But
Those scientists and engineers out there.
But we want to get the care vector correctly aligned. But allyship is along the same lines, and we have this comes up a lot, Lee, when we do the IP inclusive conversations and the EDI conversations. We want to be an ally, we want to help. What do we say? How do we start the conversation? And that's going to be one of the big topics that we look at on the 25th. Great panel, very quick plug. Colin Burrs, Sir Colin Burrs, Vandita Chandrani, and Suzanne Oliver, all talking about their insights and thoughts about how to be a good ally. So thank you for letting me plug that. Very important, and it's all part of the same big picture that we're all trying to work towards, I think.
I know we've been through the Jonathan's Voice events, but do you want to just give a shout out again for the one that I think is next week?
Yeah, that's right. November the 21st. It's on the IP Inclusive website, registration there. And it's being held at the Kelty offices in London. So it's going to be a hybrid event. It would be great to have as many people get along as possible. It starts at 5:30 from memory. If you're not able to get along, then you can register and join online. And I think it'd be a great occasion to listen to Dr. Susie Bennett talk about her groundbreaking research, which was done at the University of Glasgow. And what she's now doing is creating materials in conjunction with an organisation called Man Up. If people haven't come across the organisation Man Up, again, it's well worth having a look at what they do. But as the name suggests, they focus on men's mental health, but she's working with them to turn her research materials into materials that are more readily accessible by the general public, and should be talking about that. So absolutely, if anyone at the last minute can register, there's still space, please do. And I don't know whether Rich has the date in his head of the Ryan Park event.
Yes. Just on the event, 21st November, just worth mentioning, I think, Edward Belknap's efforts as well, because I've not had anything to do with this. This is Edward Kelty who sort of taken the initiative, and I think he reached out to you, Graham, didn't he? And that was the genesis of that, which is really good. And I think that came from Edward coming to our previous events, and it's really nice the way in which the willingness to push forward on men's mental health feels like it's permeating through the profession in a really good way. But yeah, on to the webinar. So that's on the 5th of February next year. So it's very much a date for your diary. I think it's 12:30. So it's sort of a lunch and learn, as I think you like to say, when it feels like you're disappearing off instead of working. But it's should be great, Ryan Park, and that's also on the IP Inclusive website as well, so you can register for that too. And I think both events, as with everything for IP Inclusive and Jonathan's Voice, are free at the point of contact, so there's obviously no cost to attend either of these events. And the more people we have talking about men's mental health, or just being in the room and soaking it all up, the better, frankly. And it should be said as well that genders are relevant to attending the event. We're talking about men's mental health, but we're, men and individuals who identify men welcome as our, allies of other genders.
Thanks both for coming on the podcast. It's been a true delight having you on. At this stage, I would normally ask a question, and that question would be, is there a question we should have asked you that we haven't asked? Is there anything else you want to say? But can I ask a slightly different question? And then I'll hand over to Gwilym, because I think Gwilym's got a closing question. So my question would be, what would you want people to take away from the conversation we've had over the last 45, 50 minutes? What should be people's big takeouts from this?
I'll let Graham go first so I can think.
Okay. My takeaway is that we're moving the vector analogy. Yeah, let me home in on the vector analogy. The vector analogy is that we're heading in the right direction. We're going at a good speed, but it would be nice to go faster. But I think it's a positive message. I think the other takeaway is that we want as many people as possible to get involved. We just want to reach out to as many people as we can. We have a LinkedIn channel. We've got 885 followers on that LinkedIn channel, but I'd love to double that. And I'd love to have people contributing. So please follow us on LinkedIn, see what we're doing, keep abreast of what we're doing, have a quick look at our website. And we'd love to have people hosting events, writing material from an IP perspective. Our unique selling point, remember, is to work with the IP community. So the more involvement we can have with the community, the better.
Thank you, Graham. And so, Rich, what would yours be?
Oh, I've now bought some time. So I think mental health in general, and specifically men's mental health, is a challenging topic. And I think it's very easy to get like analysis paralysis. We as scientists, patent attorneys, like to understand everything and to be able to boil everything down into individual components we can fully understand. But don't let that analysis paralysis get in the way of, if you're struggling reaching out for help, or if you want to help trying to affect change in your firm, your community, whatever, and it's really, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, really. If you're interested but you don't know what to do, reach out to me, reach out to Graham, reach out to Andrea. There's many ways in which you can learn and many ways in which you can help and get help.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm just conscious of how difficult it will be for patent attorneys to hear, not let perfection be the enemy of the good. That's
yeah. Good luck out there. But yeah, I think it's true. And maybe that's part of the problem in the profession.
Thank you both for sharing your time with us. So ordinarily at the end, I would come up with some closing question to take us all by surprise. But Gwilym and I have been sort of like discussing in the chat. We don't know what each of our questions are, but I think mine is sort of like quite safe and possibly something we've done previously when we've had these conversations. Gwilym tells me he's got a silly one, so I quite fancy letting Gwilym do the silly one if that's all right with you two. So the way this works is that Gwilym's going to ask me his question. He's going to then ask it of you two, and then I'm going to surprise him by throwing it back to him.
Yeah,
all yours, Gwilym.
It is really silly, and I feel a bit guilty after really quite a serious conversation. But hey, let's go with it anyway. So Lee, we talked at the very beginning about the fact that I'm already feeling Christmassy and you're not that ready for it. What is the thing that triggers the beginning of the Christmas, or should we say the festive period for you?
Oh wow, what a question! I'm not as bar humbug as I presented earlier. I do actually enjoy Christmas. I just like Christmas to happen sort of like at the right time. So Gwilym, it's actually my birthday. So my birthday is 14th of December. Remember that. I'll expect a card. And for me, that's always been my trigger point. That's when Christmas starts. For no logical or obvious reason other than that's my birthday.
That's a great answer. So should we pass it round?
Yeah, go for it.
So Graham.
My trigger point is when I see those boxes of mince pies piled high on the shelves of the supermarket. And my measure of inflation is how much they have gone from £1, which is what they were 2 or 3 years ago. So my measure of inflation is what the £1 box of mince pies is now going to cost in 2024.
Any predictions? What's your prediction?
Oh, I think we're heading towards, well, it depends where you buy them. But I think we're heading towards 140, maybe 140, 150. I'm not sure.
Lee, where are you going on this?
I don't eat mince pies. So a bit like a politician, I have no idea how much they cost. I'm surprised they're as little as £1.
Oh, well, you need to shop where I shop.
I was gonna say, like mince pies was going to be my trigger as well, but I'll find another one. But on that, I bought a 6-pack of mince pies for £4.50 yesterday. They've all gone in less than 24 hours. But yeah, I feel like the financial burden of keeping that burn rate going until the 25th of December is going to bankrupt me. But yeah, I think my triggers. I've got 2 young kids, and so it's their first. They're twins. It's their first year in school, and I've got a new trigger, which is the October emails from school, completely binding your diary up with Christmas events, seemingly from mid-November. Like our calendar looks like a mess of shoeboxes, costumes, various things that we need to send. So yeah, I do feel like that's the trigger for me. It's when when diary politics becomes even more problematic in our house.
Thank you. And I'm glad that at least two of us here buy our own mince pies. Breaking news, SEPA CEO has people to buy his mince pies for him. That's what I've learned from this.
No, we love us. I don't eat mince pies. Not that someone buys them for me. So come on then, Gwilym. What would be your trigger moment?
Do you know, it's the first Christmas pudding, which is almost invariably at some weird IP event, funnily enough. But we've got dinner coming up and we'll have a Christmas pudding. And it's when the Christmas pudding comes up, that's suddenly I get all excited.
So it's a good job we're not talking more about Christmas, isn't it? Because I've now come up with another Christmas question. So I'll save that for our festive special, Gwilym. So expect a cracking Christmas question. That's difficult to say. Later in December. Graham, Rich, thank you so much for coming on and sharing not just your time, but also your experiences, your expertise, and just insights into a topic that's difficult for men to talk about and difficult to talk about on a podcast. So these are always for us the podcasts where we probably worry the most about things that we might say because we're talking about stuff that actually is by definition quite difficult to talk about. So thank you for the conversation we've had today. Thank you, Gwilym. I'll see you on the next one. And just a thank you to everyone who's listened to this. And if you've found it inspiring, interesting, informative, then leave us a little review on the podcasting platform of your choice and other people will find the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.